Beating every Star Wars game ever, Season 1 is complete. I want to talk about the games I've played so far while the memories are still fresh. I'm ranking each game by how fun it is to play and how good of an adaptation it is if the game is an adaptation. Rankings for later games in the series will have a greater emphasis on the game's story, but these older games don't have the same capacity for storytelling, so it's only going to be a minor part of my considerations. S tier is going to be reserved for the games that are the best of the best, what I consider must play, just a perfect game. A tier will be for games with great gameplay and great story and very little or no flaws at all. B tier will be for great games that either have great gameplay or great story, but not necessarily both, and there's some minor flaws that stop it from being A tier. C tier is for good games that have a lot of flaws but still might be worth playing. D tier is for bad games, either the gameplay is bad or the story is bad or both, generally just not worth playing. An F tier will be reserved for the absolute worst of the worst. It's for games that should be considered a form of torture. So with that, we're going to start with the first game, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. This game is a lot of fun. It's quite simple. You just fly around in a snowspeeder and shoot down the Imperial walkers. They respawn infinitely, so there's no real ending to the game. You only lose by running out of lives or by the walkers getting to the end of the screen. It's not super accurate to the movie because there's no tow cables or anything. It's still a really fun game that you can play and challenge yourself to try and get a high score in. I'm a little hesitant to put it in A tier already because I know that later down the line I'm going to like so many games that the A tier is going to be really bloated. And if we were talking about the Intellivision version, I would probably put it in B or C tier because that game, while technically having better graphics, it feels worse to control. But I'm just trying to rank the Atari version, so I am just gonna put it in A tier. For Star Wars Jedi Arena, this is meant to be a competitive two-player game. Playing against the computer AI doesn't really give you the proper experience. I really enjoyed the mechanics of the game, but I'm honestly not very good at it, as I showed in my video. Like the first one, it's pretty simple, but I think I'm going to have to go for B tier just because it's not as fun to play single player. Next up was the Star Wars arcade game. It's a pretty fun, linear, on-rails shooter about destroying the Death Star, but once you destroy the Death Star, it just loops. I feel like there should be a definitive ending to it. I like that it actually has 3 difficulty options though, which was probably nice back in the day when you had to pay money to play an arcade game. But on-rail shooters really aren't my thing, and this is a completely subjective list, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Up next is Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle. It's pretty fun, has that quality that the Empire Strikes Back battle does, where you can just infinitely keep destroying the Death Star. It's a bit strange how you have to jump to hyperspace to get to the Death Star every time, but I'd still consider it a solid B tier game. Then we have another Return of the Jedi, but this is an arcade game, but instead of like the other arcade game with vector lines, this one is drawn with sprites, and I found this one really frustrating to play. It really only has one main gameplay loop, which is you go fast and try to dodge all the obstacles. And when I played, it was too fast for me. Maybe it's a skill issue, but I had a really hard time dodging all the obstacles. Maybe it was also a controller issue because I was playing the port that was added as a bonus in a GameCube game. I don't know what the original arcade cabinet controls looked like, but I did not feel like a GameCube controller stick was the right way to control the game either. So I'm gonna give this one a C tier. Then we have the Empire Strikes Back arcade game, which was just a straight upgrade from the first arcade game. Still the same vector lines, still the same on-rails shooter, but it added a lot more variety. Instead of just shooting down TIE fighters and blowing up the Death Star, you get to shoot down probe droids, and then you get to dodge asteroids. So I'm going to put that at the top of B tier. And actually, I'm going to rearrange this a little bit. I think I'll put it like that. I think Death Star Battle is a little better than the first arcade game. Okay, now we get to the games that actually have endings. Namco's Star Wars game, which was only released for the Famicom, it didn't receive a worldwide release, which is a real shame because I really like this game. It takes a lot of liberties with the Star Wars story. I've been told that the game is inspired more by the comics than the movie. I don't mind an adaptation being different, but I'm still gonna point out all the differences. Like Luke defeating multiple agents of the Empire that are like animals that have an illusion power to look like Darth Vader, and he goes to all these different planets to rescue his friends, and it's super weird, but it's really fun to play. It's really difficult at first because it does not give you a lot of lives, but it's one of those games where it's easy to learn and hard to master, and if you spend the time playing the game, it becomes quite a bit of fun. It has a bunch of horse powers you can use, but only 2 or 3 of them really come in handy. All of the boss patterns are consistent, so you can learn to effectively take them down. The jumping and the platforming all feels very natural because the acceleration and the speed is constant, unless you use the optional speed power-up that gives you more of a momentum-based physics. This might be the first S-tier game because I genuinely like it that much. If it weren't for the fact that it only gives you 3 lives to start with, which makes getting into the game at first kind of a chore, so I'm gonna put it in A tier, but it is going above The Empire Strikes Back. And then we have Star Wars Droids. I like the Star Wars Droids animated cartoon, but this game is not it. It has a clunky icon-based interface. It has very annoying memory-based quote-unquote puzzles that you have to do over and over and over again. It's not like normal Simon Says, where it builds up one new piece of information at a time. It will just flash 10 colors at you in very rapid succession, and you just have to play it back perfectly. It's not fun. Also, whether or not you even make it to the end of the game is complete RNG, because the enemy droids that damage you spawn at complete random, and you only have a limited number of rocks you can throw at them, and whether or not the enemies drop new rocks to replenish your stash is, again, completely random. It is just straight up not fun to play. So this would totally be F tier, except that, I mean, the whole game is a maze, right? And I like mazes. I got out a piece of paper and a pen to draw the map of where I was going to figure out which way to go. And very few games have ever given me that same sense of, I don't even know what the word for it is, but getting out a piece of paper to draw a map is fun to me, you know? I can't give it in my heart to actually give it an F tier, so I'm gonna bump it up to D, but just know that if any game deserves an F tier, it's definitely that one. It's still not worth playing, gets at very bottom of D tier. If I could just put it way over here, I totally would. After that, we got the worldwide release of Star Wars for the Nintendo. This one I have very mixed feelings on, because the platforming is not very good. Unlike the Famicom game, where you have one speed that is all you need for all the platforming, and you have an optional ability to have a faster, looser physics-based movement, this game has platforming that forces you to use a run button that makes your jumps harder to control, and I don't like that. The combat is also worse because all of the enemy projectiles travel much faster, which is more accurate to the movie, but makes it a lot harder to dodge in-game. I did like how it gives you a bunch of extra lives to work with. It makes it a lot easier to actually learn the game, but by the time you get close to the end of the game, the difficulty curve practically goes up vertically and makes it a lot harder than I think it had to be. So this is a very cool game. I don't know whether to put it in A tier or B tier. I think I'll put it top of B tier. We have a quick detour with another game exclusive to Japan because it was only released on Japanese computer systems, which is Star Wars Attack on the Death Star. This game is fantastic. It's a lot like the arcade game, but it's not on rails. It's the first one that has a full 3D environment like you would find with traditional flight sims. That, in addition to all of the digitized voice lines from the movie and the fantastic recreation of John Williams' music, it's the first game out of all of these that makes you actually feel like, yeah, I'm playing the movie. You feel like you are Luke Skywalker taking on the Death Star. It's awesome. I really like it. It has me excited for the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series. I've never played those games because I never thought I would enjoy them. But if they're like this game, then I'm going to enjoy them a lot. So this one is going to also go in A tier. And last but not least, we have Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I just finished this game a few days ago, and just like the other NES game, I have very mixed feelings on it. The graphics are very impressive for NES standards, and once you've played the game for a while and figure out all of its little nuances, it's not that bad, but the controls are still not good. It has a strange clunkiness to the movement, and the jumping feels too predetermined. Once you start falling, you cannot move left or right anymore. You will just fall straight down until you hit something. But at least this game doesn't have any fall damage, like the first NES game. But you have to find your force powers instead of simply having them, like the Famicom game. And overall, it's a pretty fun game, but because it gives you a more limited number of lives, it's a bit harder, but only arbitrarily, if that makes sense. I think it's better than the first NES game, but not quite good enough for A tier. So that's the ranking for the first season of beating every Star Wars game ever. I'm going to continue beating the rest of the games. If you'd like to see the rest of this series, make sure to subscribe. And if you ever want to leave a comment to tell me how wrong I am for my opinions, go right ahead. That's probably the only time I'll ever say that, because I don't personally like it when YouTubers remind viewers to comment every video. If you want to, do it. If not, that's fine too. Have an awesome day and stay alive.